Good morning, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today. We were just using the same Zoom link on a meeting with our community interviewers, so I had to close that out and bring us back in. I saw you guys chime in, but I wanted to make certain that we recorded separately from that community interviewer meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to jump right in. Today, we're going to be discussing the community's experiences and perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department survey. And we do this community conversation every 2 weeks. We began on October the 26th, if I'm not mistaken, or the 19th, I think it was. And we've been meeting every 2 weeks since that time. These meetings are recorded for those who may not be able to join us at 11:30 a.m. They can refer to the recorded session at their leisure. And I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint presentation that helps us to stay on track and bring in the components of our theme. Again, today we're discussing the actual community interview. So let me open up the PowerPoint and get us started. At the end, we have moments for question and answer, but there's also something that I have to keep us sane. We have a forum. There's a link, and you use this link to post your questions. These questions, we're keeping them almost to develop, if necessary, a Q&A or a frequently asked a question log, so that we can have people reference this Q&A as they join us in this endeavor to kind of uncover what's happened with the community interview. Let me just post the link into the chat. And this also helps if time runs out and we're not able to engage in this format. If you have questions, you can actually reference that link. So let me get back to my PowerPoint. All right. All right, so welcome to Community Survey Interviews 101. Who we have on the call are quite a few folks who have some vested interests and experiences and insight about conducting community interviews. We actually had some of our community interviewers on this particular call. We obviously have some folks from the monitors for the Baltimore City Police Department monitoring team for the consent decree. We have some community members. We have our coordinator on this particular call that I'm seeing on these boxes here. We're acknowledging that we're referencing the community survey, which is a mandate from the consent decree. These are some things that we've shared in previous video discussions about the survey update. We're acknowledging that the Institute for Urban Research houses this community survey, and the Institute actually identified me, Dr. Pratt Harris, to be the principal investigator. And we began this process time one, fall 2018, with a team of community interviewers, including, in this case, some Morgan State University graduate students. And then we had community interviewers outside of that group. And I want to acknowledge something that we haven't shared in previous conversations. This is a screenshot of the initial announcement that came from the BPD monitoring team that acknowledged the goal to conduct these community interviews, where the team was expected. The team would include myself and the many persons who were involved in this endeavor. The team would work with the monitoring team, the Baltimore Police Department, the Department of Justice, and community stakeholders to develop and implement this survey, conduct the survey, and provide detailed analysis of the survey results and a public report. A public report of a community survey like the one that we are referencing today comes after the data has been collected. So we have in our proposal, and so similar or complementary to what we did for time one, 600 persons that we are recruiting and interviewing for this particular endeavor for time two. And again, it's important that we follow, number one, what the consent decree says, number two, what the RFP respondents who said, because this was the promise that we made as the organization, Morgan State University Institute for Urban Research, responsible for collecting these surveys. And some of our teammates are included here, including the heavy hitters at the bottom on this particular list, who are the community interviewers who've had the experience over the past 2 weeks since we met last time to conduct some community interviews. And we obviously have this team that includes persons who are not necessarily engaging in the actual community interviews. I wanted to offer an update. This is something I mentioned during the last conversation. We've had to modify our calendar, our schedule, because of the nature of human subject research, during a global pandemic, and the nature of human subject research during a global pandemic, where our methodology is one that speaks to protecting the human subjects and the research team regarding this particular pandemic. So this update includes where we are regarding preliminary preparation, and prep continues. Began March of 2020, where we submitted the proposal for time 2 data collection, through 2021, where there's preparation, which includes mailing the invitations that the first batch of mail to community at the random addresses was September 15th, 2021. From September 15th, 2021 through as recent as last week, the envelopes, the mail invitations, we've gotten quite a few back. There were about 290 addresses that were randomly selected. And of that 290, we've gotten about, I'd say, about a quarter or more sent back to us that we had to go in and check out to see what was the issue with the address, or what was the rationale for that particular piece of mail not being sent out. We talked about that in the previous recorded community conversation. And then through 2021, we've had to then do postcards. We mailed postcards to the addresses that we were able to verify to continue to prepare in terms of identifying participants. This particular table acknowledges that we are going to be going through this process until all the data is collected. We initially exhaust the random selection of participants via the random streets and random addresses, and then move into a purposive sample, but we have to exhaust the possibilities with this first round, and this first round is continuing. So we want to make that clear, but this particular schedule kind of gives you a sense of where we are and what we need to do. Acknowledging something that we talked about as a team, and that is our requirement to follow suit as it relates to COVID-19. I've actually done a check. There are 2 sources presented on these blue links that acknowledges where we are in Baltimore City regarding the COVID-19 vaccination. There's also information available regarding exposure, and there's also information regarding deaths as relates to COVID-19. As a social scientist and as a parent, as a professor, at Morgan State, where a vaccine is a requirement for student, staff, and faculty, we acknowledge that everyone in the community isn't vaccinated. We also acknowledge that vaccine doesn't mean 100% protection against COVID. And given all of this, we still follow protocols that require little to no contact with human subjects. So one of the things that's happened, and this is where I'm getting into the community interview, we actually have had a very small group of us in community to identify participants, especially considering the nature of the random selection based upon random streets and random addresses. And we've actually followed something very recently that speaks to our protecting human subjects. So we actually presented an interface between ourselves as members of the research team, a participant, and a community interviewer, where we were on the street this past week using a device for the participant to actually have a conversation with the interviewer without the interviewer and participant being engaged one-on-one in face-to-face. But the member of the team was actually in community, and that's something that we're documenting, and we're making some sense of how do we continue or proceed given what our goal is in terms of making certain that people are protected. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. What I mentioned earlier is the recruitment tool, which is a letter invitation. There's also a flyer invitation. identifying persons or identifying participants at the randomly selected addresses and random streets. And this is what they've gotten in the mail, or they've gotten in the mail, or as a part of the random selection of participants on random streets. Let me clear that out. Random streets where you identify participants. Okay, so this kind of gives you a visual of what that looks like in terms of the sample. And this again is discussed on the previous recorded session. Everyone on this call should have access to all those recorded sessions because it is something that I'm making certain that we have access to so we can be consistent for anyone who's looking at or partaking in this discussion about the community interviews. And again, our interviewers are CITI certified. Privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity is of the utmost importance. So let me give you some more insight regarding this very important part of this discussion. As a human subject researcher myself, I'm aware, and many folks on the call are aware of how we can protect human subjects, including something that the COVID-19 vaccine researchers were a part of. It's called a double-blind experiment. So you can actually have a vaccine, and some of your sample would get a vaccine, and another part of your sample would get a placebo, and the researcher wouldn't necessarily know who got the placebo or who got the vaccine. And what I found myself doing, because I'm super anal about maintaining confidence and privacy, when we've engaged with members of community, we haven't asked them their name. We acknowledge that they will get the name of the interviewer. They'll have my name and information. We haven't even asked them their name because we want to ensure for them that this is confidential. One of the things that happened recently with the recruitment of participants is we've had the experience of, like, I call them, I teach a class called Sociology of Baltimore, and I call them Baltimore women. Baltimore women have a certain kind of presentation. And there was one woman who spoke about maintaining the confidence, her, being very adamant about not being annoyed with someone following up on a phone call with her, and I respecting her in that way and making certain that her information doesn't go beyond just the data that's collected, and there's no confidential or identifiable information collected from a participant. So we're taking this piece very seriously, and the CITI certification speaks to our maintaining confidence, anonymity, and privacy. That was just a quick look at the survey as it relates to the varying ways it's presented in Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. And last time we talked about canvassing. You can look at the prior video to acknowledge where we are in terms of canvassing via the sampling techniques that we've identified. And the lengthy discussion did take place regarding this process, community survey interviews, and the notion of canvassing based upon the varying samples. Just give me 1 second, making sure one of my people is logged into her class. Okay, I'm back. So this particular screen was highlighted in the previous recording, and if you want to reference that, you can go back to the previous recording regarding the canvassing. Actually, this is what I'm talking about in terms of canvassing. Here we are. So I'm acknowledging, which is one of my favorite words, something we talked about earlier, that invitations were mailed September 15th. There were invitations returned through last week. We've done Google Maps canvassing October, November of this go round. We have random streets and random streets identified from random addresses. We've had to canvass that way. I've already talked about postcard invitations mailed this month, and we've already had some postcard invitations returned to us, and we're in the middle of determining what it is about this mailing that lend itself to those postcards coming back to us, because we've actually cleaned up our files acknowledging why certain pieces of mail came back from September, but now we're at the point of acknowledging that we've gotten more postcards sent back to us. We're not sure what's going on there. So where we are to date, we are selecting persons randomly via the random address sample. Now, I want to make this clear. This is going to be clear for the monitors who are on the call. We're actually having a follow-up meeting after this community conversation. We have in our proposal a process where we randomly identify persons based upon random addresses. And we have a process by which we identify persons at a particular address randomly. That is built into the model for this particular survey. We also have a process when we identify persons on a random street, meaning the street was randomly selected from, and those random addresses were generated from those random streets. And then we have a process where we randomly select participants. So what I'm acknowledging as the PI is that we've modified the random selection of participants on the random streets just a bit, given our goal to identify participants who are interested and available to partake in the survey. So one of the things we acknowledged is that when we've gone to do recruitment on the random streets, not everybody that you come upon is even interested in having a conversation with you, let alone being a part of a random selection process. So part of this random selection is acknowledging we have a random process in place, which is the random selection of streets. And then at this point, it changes just a bit where the selection of participants is not random. The selection of participants is based upon availability and willingness to participate. But there's a random process built in. We are, and I say this all the time, and this is just to make it clear for everyone who's on this call and beyond, we are partaking in human subject research. Human subjects are not situated like robots. And although we would like to just have a very strict random process of saying every 10th person, that is not working. It will not work on the actual street selection. Now, when it comes to an address, if you have a household of, and we haven't had this experience yet when we've done the household, let me take that back, address sampling, not households, but it happens to have been households that we've identified randomly for persons responding. If you have a situation where you have like 5 people at a particular address and you have to make a call on how many people will be interviewed, that's a little more of a possibility than on the street. That's a little different. So I'm just making it clear that we've identified persons on random streets, but there's more of an availability and interest piece happening. And some folks are turning us down on those streets, and that's their prerogative. And our goal is to, again, collect this data. At this point, we've collected about 10 or conducted about 10 interviews. These interviews are to last, the process in terms of data collection should be about 20 minutes. Our interviewers are fairly new. So they're learning how to kind of, read through the surveys and ask the questions and make certain that the participants understand the question and going through that process. Each interviewer, upon completing their first interview, they're actually shadowed by a member of the team who's done these before. So we're giving them feedback after the fact. And what we're finding is we know that over time, it'll speed up in terms of how long it takes. I would say on average, the interviews are lasting about 45 minutes on average. The goal, which is built into our IRB vetted proposal process, is no more than 30 minutes, but definitely down to like 20 minutes. We're not rushing the community interviewers, however, we're just acknowledging that time is of the essence. Number one, we're engaging with people based upon their time, their availability, their interest, and time is a thing. So if we're going beyond 30 minutes, we're impeding upon people's time, right? But we're not letting them know that. We're not saying, my apologies for taking so long. And we're also not telling the interviewers, you got to move faster. We're working with each person based upon their process as we go through this process of collecting surveys. And what I'm showing you at the present, and I'm going to unshare and then bring this back in a second, is I'm going to show you the actual survey. Some of us have never seen this. So I want to make sure you actually see the survey. And part of what I am responsible for is acknowledging, my favorite word, is acknowledging that the community interviewers themselves are responsible for, they're the only ones who have access to the actual survey. And with their access, they are entering the responses of the participants. The participants do not have access to the actual survey. Our community interviewers do. And this can, and it should be, a learning curve for anyone who does this, because of the kinds of the questions that are being asked, not the kinds of questions, but the questions that are being asked, and what it takes to get through a survey of this nature with members of the community. So I'm going to pull down the survey and post it, and you'll be able to see it shortly on your screen. But while I wait to pull that open, please let me share with me any questions that you have. And I'm asking not only of community members, but also our monitors, because I think it's important that community members may see or hear some of the questions from the monitors, so they'll know like the process that we have to follow when it comes to us partaking in this community interview and getting it vetted and that type of thing. So what are your questions? We have 5 good minutes for questions, and you can unmute yourself. I can't see you at the moment because I'm on another screen, but I can hear you and I can respond. And remember, if you have a question that you can't ask at the moment, I posted, and I'll post it again, the link to the question answer form that's available. Any questions? All right, so let me open up the survey itself. 1 second. And it's really interesting how you have it was right there on the screen, but then because of the way it's built into the PowerPoint, I couldn't just click it. I want to make sure you can see it. So let me just do that now in this last 5 minutes. And again, I just want to thank you guys, all of you, for joining us. And your lens, your comments, thoughts, observations, ideas, they are actually useful. So we call this meeting not to just hear me talk, which I do love my voice, but to also get feedback from community, because we actually need that. We actually acknowledge community as stakeholders in this process. So if you have a question, please share. I'm actually posting again in the chat the link. If you have a question, you can post your question there. And I'm also now going to open up the survey itself. We'll talk through this quickly. We have 3.5 good minutes. Here we are. All right. So this is what the community interviewer sees when they are actually entering the data from our participants. The first section is an introduction to the survey, acknowledging some of the players in this process, which includes myself. We also have the consent statement. And some folks may be wondering, well, how do people consent if we don't have their name or if we don't have them sign? Because this is an online survey. Well, what happens is that once we read this, we are acknowledging my verbal agreement on the statement indicates it's a verbal agreement that I have been read the information provided and have consented to participate. And we have to read the introduction and the consent verbatim, so persons can understand, and you can get to a point of acknowledging that they actually understand what it is that they are being asked to engage in. Mr. Tillman has a question. Reverend Tillman.
Yes, sorry about that. Somehow I'm operating from my phone. So my question was, I was out on the internet and I saw that there was a consent decree website. Mm-hmm. And my question is the work that you all have done part of that website information.
And Mr. Rosenthal is on the call. He's one of the deputy monitors, and he can acknowledge, yes, that there is a site. And then this particular survey, when data was collected for time one, a report for time one came out March of 2020, and that's available on that site. If this is what you're referencing, Mr. Reverend Tillman.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So the work that you're doing in phase 2, will that also then populate that site again as far as any updates are concerned?
Well, no updates because we're in the
Okay.
midst of data collection. But when we have finalized the data collection, written a report, the report is edited, the report is reviewed, the report is discussed. There are like multiple meetings about the findings and suggestions and blah, blah, blah. Then the report becomes public. But along the process, what community gets is like this opportunity to share thoughts or ideas about what they're learning about where we are in the process. Thank you so much. And again, these are the questions. We have now a good minute. But again, the community interviewer indicates their name, their last name, everything is included so we can acknowledge who's partaking. And part of what we have here, just for out of interest, you might have interest in, we have 3 samples. The address sample and the field sample are the random sample of participants, or random sample, or sampling technique, which is random, where we identify participants. Okay, addresses, and then on those random streets, that means field. And then when we get to the point, or if we get to the point of doing a purposive sample, we'll include hard to reach persons or persons who weren't represented in this random selection process via the purposive sample. I'm not going to move on from this screen because this again is a lengthy survey, but I am imploring everyone on this call to make certain that you share the invitation for our next community conversation about the updates on this community survey, which will be on the 30th of November. And the sharing includes the recording from our training. And in that training, the survey questions are included there. So you'll see the questions that the community interviewers have to ask. And then obviously all the other conversations are included in this recorded session. And then this conversation will also be included in as far as recorded sessions, because again, we want to make certain that the community is involved in this process. And we truly welcome your feedback and suggestions, comments, and thoughts. And we have incorporated them. So for example, one of our community members talked about who we are as persons in Baltimore and how people are responding to a piece of mail, or how people respond to a postcard, and how people are responding to having to talk via Zoom or FaceTime or WhatsApp or a phone, and what our role can be to inspire participation given our requirement to follow protocols regarding COVID-19. So we actually implemented some things based upon that kind of feedback. And I also want to acknowledge, thank you, Megan. She was able to post the link in the chat. I think you were given a high five on that, Reverend Tillman, on the actual report. So that report from time 1 from March 2020. So that's available. So if there are no questions, thank you, Reverend Tillman. Yep, and you can watch the previous recording because I will send out in my invitation for the 30th of November, that includes all the recordings. All the recordings are included or embedded in that invitation. So you can play catch up. And you're also welcome to share. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts? Ideas or suggestions? All right, well, we wish you well and happy holidays to everyone. Take the best of care. I'm going to end this session and then I'm going to move into another meeting, which probably uses the same link. So those who are invited to that second session, the second meeting at 12 o'clock, please log out and log back in. I appreciate it. Take it easy, everybody.